You are listening to the Project Management Podcast, and we are coming live to you from the PMI Global Congress 2014 in Phoenix. With me right now is Jim DePiante. Hello, Jim.
Hello.
This is long overdue, isn't it? I've wanted to I've wanted to have you on the program ever since you were the keynote about IBM's Watson. What was that, like 4 years ago?
It's back in Dallas in 2011, so 3 years ago, yeah.
Yes. Your presentation at this year's Congress is titled Con Artists, Swindlers and Project Managers, Managing the Project Portfolio. A very interesting topic. What's your interest in this particular topic?
Well, the title, of course, has to be a little bit provocative, so you want people to attend your presentation. So it is. The topic of the presentation is around portfolio management. The idea being, if securities dealers sold securities with the same lack of rigor that project portfolio managers invest in projects with the same poor information, they'd probably get thrown in jail. So the presentation was around doing the things that a good project manager needs to do to give the portfolio manager the kind of meaningful information that that person can use to do the things that a portfolio manager does, which is to say make wise investments and balance that portfolio, optimize it with respect to return on investment and risk.
Okay. Allow me to take a quick step back and talk about the whole administration of your presentation. What I'd like to know, is this a new presentation? Have you given this before? Or is it a requirement for the Global Congress that you present something that has never been presented before?
The Global Congress's requirement is that when you submit a paper, it cannot have been submitted more than one other time.
Okay.
So if you submit it, for example, for the EMEA Congress, and it's either accepted or not, then you can submit it again for the following North America Congress.
Okay.
But beyond that, you can't submit the same thing a second
to PMI.
To PMI. However, what you do outside of PMI,
right, you retain the copyright. You can now go and use this presentation.
So this particular presentation I actually first gave in Madrid, Spain in 2007.
Oh,
and
okay.
I've given flavors of it, mostly in Europe, interestingly.
Okay.
In fact, I most recently did a brief version of this for IPM Day, International Institute for Learning's International Project Management Day. And so it will be up in mid-November, about a 20-minute version of the same presentation.
Okay. So basically, if I understand the title correctly, you're calling all project management liars, right?
Well,
how rampant do you see this problem actually? How rampant do you find that this is, that we are not really sure about the information we have and we're giving almost misinformation when it comes to the financials?
My own experience personally, and then dealing with other project managers, is that the information that we provide to portfolio managers is wanting. It doesn't give them the information they need to do an adequate job, and that the real answer is to take some of the project risk out of the equation by doing a good job managing the project so that we can give portfolio managers a tighter and more reliable set of ranges in terms of scope, schedule, and cost for the status of our project as it develops. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure it's pervasive.
Yeah.
Owing in large measure to the fact that portfolio management is a discipline, is not as well implemented, frankly, as project management. And portfolio managers don't seem to know often enough what they should be asking their project managers for in terms of information.
So it's sort of a shared responsibility, a shared fault then, that the information is lacking?
Absolutely. Portfolio managers need to understand the projects in financial terms and the information that they use with respect to project risk, namely the scope, the schedule, and the budget on the project, can only come from the project manager. Now, there's another side to that, and that's the business side. in terms of what is it that we're creating and what do we expect will be the return on this investment. That really is a thing apart from what the project manager is doing. That has to do with the business case. By the time the project manager takes responsibility for the project, those things should already be well understood in terms of the forecast for the business. So the value to the business of the asset is something that the project manager isn't involved in as a project manager. They may be involved in other respects, but as project manager, it really isn't the project manager's discipline. That has to do with the business and the portfolio management. So it is shared in that sense. The project manager's responsibility is around being able to provide meaningful information with respect to scope, schedule, and cost as they evolve and as risk is reduced as the project proceeds.
Okay. What is the underlying problem then for us project managers? Why do you think we are not really capable of providing good information, good numbers for scope, cost, and schedule?
I don't mean to seem glib, but the fact of the matter is that a lot of times the job that we do planning isn't as good as it might be, and frankly, that's because we haven't done the job of articulating the requirements hasn't been done as well as it might. And unfortunately, a lot of project managers find themselves involved in defining requirements, but they're really not trained to do that, and it's really not a project manager's task. It's really the task of the business analyst. And a properly trained business analyst knows how to elicit and articulate business requirements, which then can be used to create a well-articulated set of system requirements, which the project manager can then use to plan. Mm-hmm. And, all failures in terms of, what does it mean to say a project is late? Late with respect to what? It's not arbitrary. This project's over budget. Over budget with respect to what? It's with respect to the plan. And for heaven's sake, who makes the plan but the project manager? Why should a project ever be over budget? Why should a project ever be late? And the fact is that that is the case, not because of execution, but because of planning. And a proper job of planning presumes a well-articulated set of requirements, which unfortunately, the nature of this thing is nobody wants to take time to do a good set of requirements up front.
It's very interesting that you're saying that. I once did an interview with Quentin Fleming. Quentin is sort of Mr. Earned Value. He literally wrote the book about earned value project management for PMI. And he said, step one in earned value is define requirements.
Absolutely.
And you're basically saying the same thing.
I'm saying
step
exactly
one
the same
in
thing.
proper portfolio management and getting the numbers is define the requirements properly.
Yep.
Yeah.
What do you want this asset to be? And the requirements are always, the business requirements are always around what is the anticipated future benefit to the business? Why are we doing this? And that return is why the project is undertaken. And that is the thing that managing the project influences upon, because a project that doesn't deliver the anticipated scope will not render the return that it should. A project that is late will begin to render the return later than expected, which reduces the value of the return. And a project that costs more than it should increases the cost of the asset, which reduces the return on the investment.
So we should actually be very happy that regulations around projects aren't as strict as in asset management, because we might all be in prison.
There you go. There you go. In fact, if securities dealers had the lack of rigor that we and our portfolio managers have when we talk about investing in projects, those securities dealers would be in jail.
Okay. You told me before the interview that you don't like the statement, projects are like investments. Why not?
I have to ask, in what respect are they not investments? Projects are investments, strictly speaking. They have all the characteristics of any investment. There's an asset. Now, that asset is the result of the project. They have a cost. The price of the asset is your project cost. And they have the return. That's why you're undertaking the project. And there's risk associated with that return. Beyond that, they're more interesting than typical investments because they have the added dimension of project risk.
Okay. So we've determined, scope, cost, and schedule. We can't get the right numbers because we don't have the scope defined. When that happened to me, I always knew that the numbers weren't really all that right, that I'm just sort of trying my best to guesstimate these numbers. And I'm pretty sure project managers out there have exactly the same feeling. They know in their gut, I'm not sure if these numbers are 100% right. What is the step? What do we do if we get this feeling and we know, okay, something's not right with these numbers?
Back up.
Is it as easy as that?
Honestly, I've done projects the right way and I've done them the wrong way. I got to tell you, to do a project with a well-articulated set of requirements is just a joy. It's just a joy. And when you don't have a well-articulated set of requirements, it's just painful. It really is. I can't emphasize enough, that's where it begins. How can you say how much it's going to cost and when it's going to be done when you don't even know what it is? And you don't know what it is because you don't know what it is supposed to be. So it is scope, and what it's supposed to be is the requirements. And so unfortunately, project managers are asked to give schedule and budget estimates for poorly articulated scope, which is based on poorly articulated requirements. The real challenge is to have the courage to say, wait a minute, what I'm telling you now isn't particularly reliable because the job we've done on getting to scope is lacking simply because the job that we did on getting to requirements is lacking.
Mm-hmm. Earlier on, you said that doing the requirements, getting the requirements, defining them, articulating them is not necessarily the job of the project manager, right? Business analysts have more of the acumen it takes here. So PMI is currently releasing their new certificate, the PMI Professional in Business Analysis. Do you think that certificate, that help that we're getting now from that certification may change the game in a way?
I think it can certainly help. Although I insist that when an individual is out eliciting requirements and articulating requirements, they're not functioning as a project manager. They may also have the job of project manager, but in that capacity, they're functioning as a business analyst. The business of defining requirements is the business of the business analyst. The business of managing projects is the business of the project manager.
Okay. So you're not saying the dual role is wrong, because on my projects, I often had to do both, being the project manager and the BA. But as soon as you put on your BA hat,
you're functioning as a BA. You're a BA. On. You're a business analyst.
So
now.
you have to really elicit those requirements. You have to do it right, so that then when you go back and
hand them off to yourself as the project manager now,
so that you can do your job right and do the right estimate, so that the portfolio isn't lying.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
It sounds too easy.
You know, it ought to be. It ought to be. It's a tremendous frustration. I wish I could say that I had done more of the projects I had done properly, but it's a tough sell. It takes a great deal of self-assurance to go to the folks who are pushing to get the work started and say, we really aren't ready to go. I mean, we could get started, but we really need to have a better understanding of the requirements before we proceed.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter which approach you're using, whether you're using more of a waterfall approach or more of an agile approach or some other flavor of an iterative approach. At some point, all the work you're doing needs to have been planned. And all of the planning that you're doing needs to be based on requirements. So maybe you only want to define a few of the requirements now, and then get smarter about what it is you want as you go. But still, there's this logical progression. Really, these iterative processes, everything in time happens sequentially. There's just no way around that. So iterative means you just have much smaller waterfall processes where you learn something before you enter the next phase of define your requirements or refine your requirements, define or refine scope definition, and now work out your schedule and your budget for that little piece. Ultimately, you still need to plan all the work you do. All the work you're doing has to have been planned, and that depends on a good set of requirements.
You said it's a tough sell to stand up and say, this is wrong, we don't have the requirements right, we need more time to get these requirements done and elicited properly so that we're not running into a wall here. How can we help our listeners and make this sell easier for them? Is there a way?
I believe there is. A lot of the folks who are involved in this kind of decision making, their heads are around numbers and data. and they understand that kind of thing. So we can strive to give them the kind of decision-making information they need that they will see and recognize as meaningful if we talk to them in their terms. There is so much information out in the world on the value of finding problems sooner in the process rather than later. It's astonishing. It doesn't just grow. The cost of fixing problems doesn't just grow arithmetically. It grows geometrically. It's enormous, the difference in cost to find a problem in the requirement stage as opposed to finding a problem once a piece of software, for example, heaven forbid something like a bridge, is out in production. It's just easier to find and solve the problems on paper. The challenge is to persuade the people who need to be persuaded that this time spent up front is extraordinarily cost effective. But again, the data is not wanting. The data's out there. There's tons and tons of information out in the world based on real projects that say, find the problems early. So find some of that information, put together a little presentation, and start to educate, start to change the culture in your organization by educating folks around the importance of doing this kind of thing. And by the way, it doesn't mean you have to do a full-blown implementation of CMMI. There is an 80-20 rule at work here. Certainly you can become really, really, really good, but there's a whole lot to be gained at just being pretty good. And so if you could just get pretty good at defining requirements, you're going to be way better off than winging it.
When you started developing your presentation, what were the words of wisdom that you wanted to impart on your attendees? What was the one thing you wanted them to take out of the presentation and take home with them?
If we can say that a project is an investment, then we can also say that a project portfolio is an investment portfolio. Portfolio managers need good information. A lot of the information that the portfolio manager needs comes from the project manager. We can give them better information to the extent that we manage the project well, and that means that we've planned the project well, and that means that we have a well-articulated set of requirements.
Jim, thank you very much for waiting 4 years.
That was worth every minute of it.
On the Project Management Podcast for this interview. I appreciate
My pleasure.
your time.
Thank you, Cornelius. I appreciate it.